Chapter 36. It was late afternoon on the day following the continuous drizzle. During the night, the rain had ceased altogether. Dawn rose brilliantly over a small camp in southeast Mossflower. Doogy Plumm, Euphus Lightpaw, and his wife Diggity, together with the little tortoise Rockbottom, had spent a passably comfortable night. In a worn old sandstone formation they had come across amidst the trees, they had made a small shelter by laying boughs and ferns over an undercut ledge. Bright sunlight reflected in each dewdrop hanging from bush and bough. Somewhere nearby, 2 finches were cheeping and a missel thrush warbling. Rising sunrays shafted through the foliage. But it was not the plop of dewdrops or the charming birdsong which wakened the sturdy Highlander. It was Euphus. Unable to sleep, and in an effort to stir his wife into providing breakfast from the sack which now served as her pillow, the water vole began singing and tapping a footpaw against the great drum. Boom, bo-boom, bo-boom-pity-boom-pity-boom. Sure, it was an old vole called Rakkety Tam. Now wasn't he just a grand fella? He wore breeches of scarlet or scar snowy white, and a tailcoat with buttons of yellow. He could dance a fine jig in his high-buckled boots. He could quaff of a flag on a scrumpy. He wore a great feather of green in his hat, and his stomach was round, fat, and lumpy. A rumpety-bumpety-tumpety-tim. He could charm all the ladies around. He was merry and cheery and never grew weary. The smile on his face never frowned. Such a nice darling creature in every fine feature. You'd hear any old biddy remark. Oh, he's so polite from morning till night, and he can sing like a silver-tongued lark. A rumpety-bumpety-tumpety. Yow! Euphus was knocked sideways as the loaded footsack clouted him over the head. Diggity, who had thrown it, stood over him, paws akimbo. Now will you hush that rambunctious din? You're frightening all the frogs in the neighbourhood with that racket. Euphus massaged his ear ruefully. But I thought you were fond of me singing. Doogy unwrapped the cloak from round his head. Singing, you call it? Oh, he's more like somebody's calling a duck with a mallet. Thief is the right title for you. I've been robbed of my sleep and all that drum banging on the earth-walling. The incorrigible Euphus gave him a wink and a grin. He began rummaging in the food sack. Ah, but Mr. Plumm, me old darling, you wouldn't want to be sleeping such a sunny morning away now, would ye? Sure, a day like this gives a beastie like myself a roaring appetite. Let's see what we've got for breakfast. Diggity snatched the food sack from him. I'm in charge of the rations round here. Stir your stumps now and find me some firewood. Thrusting her head into the sack, the vole wife investigated its contents, then called to her husband. Don't bother yourself with the firewood. There's nothing in here but a few crusts and me cooking pan and kettle. The vole thief's jaw dropped. You mean to tell me we're out of victuals? Diggity's paws poked through a big hole in the bottom of the sack. Indeed we are, and here's the reason why. Her husband's normally cheerful face was the picture of misery. We'll starve to death completely, so we will. The vole wife glared at Doogy and Euphus. All the more reason for you two witless wanderers to find the Abbey of Redwall then, isn't it? Euphus pointed the paw at Doogy. 'Twas him that got us lost, not me. The Highlander defended himself indignantly. Oh, you wee fibber. Who was it wanted to turn left up that 3-topped oak last night, instead of right as I suggested, huh? Euphus looked shocked. Starting that, are we? Then who suggested we turn west by the stream yesterday morning? Tell me that, you great fluffy-tailed fraud. He dodged behind the drum as Doogy came after him angrily. I never said west. I was all for carrying on north. Euphus hooted. North? Sure you wouldn't know north from the nut-nose on your face. I was the one who said to go north. I may be a thief, but I ain't a liar like some I could mention. Doogy was outraged. Who are you calling a liar? I'll punch your fat head into the middle of next season, and send your fat wee bottom after it. Boom! Diggity struck the drum hard with her cooking pan. Silence, the pair of you. This is getting us nowhere. Any more arguing and I'll settle it with this pan over both of your thick skulls. Do you hear me? They both sulked about like 2 dibbins being sent to bed. Oh, it was your husband that started it, ma'am. Look, did you hear that, did you? He's trying to put the blame on me now. Aye, well, that's where the blame belongs, my friend. Oh, no, it doesn't. Oh, yes, it does. Bonk, bonk. Diggity once again wielded the pan as Euphus and Doogy both stood, rubbing their heads. I warned you. Now let's pack up and get going. I'll lead the way. You two follow. I'll find Redwall for you. Euphus touched his head gingerly. But, my love, you've never been to Redwall Abbey before. The vole wife squared her shoulders decisively. Maybe not, but I can't make much more of a mess finding it than you two bright sparks. Come on, quick match. They crawled out of the little shelter and Doogy shrugged. Quick match, sure enough, ma'am, but which way? Digity placed her pan on the ground and spun it. She nodded at the direction the pan handle was pointing. This way. Then she looked at Rockbottom. The little tortoise nodded his agreement. Though they had to ford a shallow stream and skirt some patches of marshland, the going was fairly smooth. Wherever possible, the Volwife kept to what looked like obvious paths betwixt the tall trees. Doogy followed behind her, rolling the great drum along, whilst Euphas trudged in the rear. The Volthief began grumbling and muttering to the tortoise, who was strapped to his back. Sure, I thought you'd have taken my side of things back there again, those two. But you never supported my cause by a nod or a wink, did you? Now look where it's got us. We'll wind up at the back of no place like this. I'm telling you, me little stony friend, my Digity's a darling creature, but she couldn't find the floor as she fell in it. See, I told you, she's at the halt. Euphas approached his wife triumphantly, nodding and smirking. Sure, and why you stop me, old duckadil? Lost are ye? Digity looked up from the watercress she was gathering from the side of a tiny brook. Does it look like I'm lost, you great madame? Go and gather some firewood and I'll make you something to eat. Mr. Plum, will you gather those wild mushrooms and pick some of that ransom? Not too much, though. It can taste a bit strong in the soup. Upon the mention of food, Euphas hurriedly began gathering dead twigs and dried grass. Soup! Will you listen to her? Mr. Plum, sir, don't you wish you had a grand little wife like me? When it came to cooking, the Volwife certainly knew what she was doing. Toasting the crusts of oatcake over the fire, she crumbled them into her cooking pan, which she had filled half full with brook water. Borrowing Doogy's dirk, she chopped her ingredients into the pan, a touch of the wild garlic known as ransom, a few dozen of the white mushrooms, lots of watercress, some dandelion roots and charlock pods, wild radish, hedge mustard, sweet woodruff petals, and a good pinch of rock salt which she always carried in her apron pocket. Euphas and Doogy sat by the brook, sniffing appreciatively at the savoury aroma emanating from the bubbling pan over the fire. The Highlander winked at the Volthief as he fashioned some scoops from a piece of bark. You're a braw lucky beast, my friend. Having a wee wife who can make a meal out of nothing. That soup smells bonny. Euphas smiled. And she can sing too. Listen. The Highlander pushed him playfully. Aye, and I ken she sings far better than you do. Digity stirred away at the thickening soup, singing in a clear, sweet tone. Now me mammy once said, don't you live all alone. Keep your bits and small pieces together. For one day you'll need them to furnish your home, neath a roof warm and safe from the weather. For all of the fine places our hearts ever known, sure there's none that I love more than my dear little home. Then go find you someone who'll care for you good, to sit quiet by your side at the fire. And if he treats you decent, as you hoped he would, you'll have all that your heart can desire. For all of the fine places our hearts ever known, sure there's none that I love like my dear home. Let the wind howl outside and the rain batter down, with the hearth snug and cosy indoors. No queen in a palace who wears a gold crown knows a life full and happy as yours. For all of the fine places our hearts ever known, sure there's none that I love like my dear little home. Euphas smiled fondly. How would you like a grand sweet wife like that now, Doogy Plumm? The Highlander rubbed his head thoughtfully. Aye, she could slay all my enemies by belting them over the skulls with that cook pan of hers. The soup was thick and delicious. They shared it equally, with a small portion set aside to cool for Rockbottom. Doogy watched the little creature as Digity fed him from a folded dock leaf. Do you reckon he'll have a talk one day? The Volwife giggled. Sure, if he ever does, 'twill only be to ask what's for dessert, won't it, me little darling? The tortoise seemed to smile and nod his head. The Highlander was still curious about Rockbottom, though Euphas and Digity did not seem bothered at all. Doogy stroked the little fellow's head with his paw, inquiring further. I wonder, has he ever ventured out of yon shell? The Volthief replied, straight-faced. He doesn't like any place seeing him wearing only his nightie. I saw him once, but he ran back into the shell. Doogy looked as if he believed Euphas for a moment, then realised the watervole was joshing him. Ya wee fibber! Euphas looked innocent. No, I'm not. Doogy retorted. And I say ya. Digity raised the empty cooking pan. Here now, Let's have no more of that. Let's be on our way. They continued the journey, Euphus and Doogy lagging behind slightly, whispering to each other. The Highlander shook his head. I wonder if Tam and the patrol made it back to the Abbey. Euphus watched his wife's back as she plodded along with dogged determination. Sure, we'll never know, mate. We'll be wandering this land until we've both got long grey beards and walking sticks. Doogy nodded agreement. His confidence in their pathfinder was at a very low ebb. I thought when we set out this morning that your wee wifey had some idea of the route to go. Euphus hitched Rockbottom up in his harness. Mark my words, old Doogy Plumm, we're well lost. I don't know what possessed me to let her lead the way. My Digity's never been much further than her own doorstep. A hill appeared ahead of them. Digity hurried forward, ascending steep slope. Euphus stared up at her before commenting, Didn't we go up this hill yesterday? The poor creature's demented. She's dashing about like a mad beast now. Look! The Volwife had reached the hilltop. She was dancing up and down, pointing frantically and shouting, There it is! Redwall! After a hasty scramble, Euphus and Doogy joined her on the summit. The Highlander shaded a paw over his eyes. There in the distance he could see the south side of the Abbey. The Vol thief cut a jig. Grabbing his wife, he hugged and kissed her, crying jubilantly, I knew you'd find it, me own darling sugar plum. You'd take us to Redwall, you said, and sure enough you did. Wasn't I just saying to Doogy here, if any beast could get us that Abbey, then my Digity's the one to do it. Doogy sat down upon the great drum, nodding readily. He did not have the heart to speak the truth. Och, he's on nothing but the boddiest things to say about you, ma'am, and who am I to doubt your husband's word? The Highlander looked at Rockbottom, who shook his little head and retreated into his shell. Digity was slightly fussed by the lavish praise being heaped upon her, but being the practical Volwife, she was quick to recover. I thank you both for your faith in me. Now we best get matching, sure we don't want to be late for supper tonight. With renewed vigour, they stepped out towards their goal. The great drum trundled easily alongside Doogy, who controlled it like a hoop with a stout twig. To keep their spirits up, he sang an old marching song he recalled from his Highland days. Set my plate and my tankard on the table, and watch out for me coming home tonight. Keep my supper in the oven if you're able, and in the window place a welcome light. Tramp, 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 hear what the sergeant said. Tonight I'll be sleeping in my own wee bed. No more laying neath the stars in the heather. No more eating what the greasy cook has burnt. No more toiling through the cold and rainy weather. Once to my bonny home I've returned. Tramp, 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 hear what the sergeant said. Tonight I'll be sleeping in my own sweet bed. On the tramp bits, Doogy hit the drum with his twig. He could not recall any more of the verses, so he sang it twice again, with Euphus and Digity joining in on the chorus with gusto. After a while, Euphus began eyeing the drum. Doogy could tell he was planning to steal it, by one means or the other. The Vol thief grinned cheerily at him. Sure you must be getting tired and weary of looking and pushing that useless old drum along. Why don't you let me take charge of the clumsy thing for a bit? Doogy left Euphus in no doubt that he was onto him. I'll thank you to keep your thieving eyes off this drum. You can 'tis the property of Redwall Abbey, and that's where I'm to deliver it, all in good order. As to what becomes of your good wife's wee pet Rockbottom, well, the abbot should be the one to decide that. Digity looked quite concerned. But I couldn't be without dear little Rockbottom. He's my own darling pet. Do you think the abbot will want to keep him, Mr. Plumm? She sobbed visibly and wiped her eyes upon her pinafore. Doogy patted the Volwife's paw comfortingly. From what I've seen of Abbot Humble, he's a kindly old beastie. He'll no steal your pet from you, ma'am, and I'll have a word with him myself. Digity smiled gratefully. My thanks to you, Mr. Plumm. You're a darling, soft-hearted creature yourself, to think of me the way you do. Doogy's bushy tail rose in an arc over his head and dropped down to cover his face, a sure sign of embarrassment in any squirrel. Walk away with you, Mrs. Lightpaw. Only do it 'cause I'm so powerful fond of your sausage rolls. The long day was drawing to a pleasant close as the weary travellers emerged from South Mossflower woodlands. Across the grassy commonland in front of them, Redwall Abbey rose majestically, all dusty pink and shadowed by the day's last sunlight. The waterfalls were walking slightly in front of Doogy, who was still rolling the drum along. As a born warrior, Doogy had always possessed an inbred sense of danger. As they broke through the trees onto the grassland, the squirrel warrior's neck fur began prickling. The crack of paw upon twig caused him to whirl around, grabbing at his claymore hilt. He saw 6 vermin stalking through the undergrowth in an attempt to encircle him and his 2 friends, with Gulo the Savage at their centre. The Highlander drew his claymore, yelling to the voles, "Run for it, mates! Get into the abbey now!" Euphis and Digity paused for a moment, looking puzzled. Then they turned and saw the vermin. Doogy launched himself at the enemy, roaring, "Run! Run! You can do no good here! Away to braw!" Euphis grabbed his wife and hustled her wildly along. One of the vermin broke away from the rest, attempting to cut the water voles off. Doogy whirled, slaying him with a sweep of his claymore, and as he did so, the Highlander's back was turned from the vermin for but a moment. That was all the time that Gulo the Savage needed. He quickly grabbed a hefty rock and threw it at the Highlander. The missile made a clunking sound as it bounced off the back of Doogie's head. He slumped to the ground unconscious. Hauling his wife along, Euphis ran as he had never run before. Neither of the voles looked back as they sped across the common land toward the south wall gate. With Rockbottom bouncing around in his backsling, the vole thief threw himself at the wicket gate, panting and roaring, "Attack! Attack for the love of mercy! Open the gate!" Digity joined him, wailing piteously, "Our show will be completely destroyed if you don't let us in! Help! Help!" Fortunately, Olba Molwife was taking a group of Dibbons for an evening stroll around the Abbey Pond before packing them off to their beds. Brookfloor the otter maid accompanied them, lest any should fall into the water, a fairly common occurrence when abbey babes and ponds come into contact. The little party was skirting the south edge of the water when they heard the vole's impassioned cries. Brookfloor acted promptly, shouting out a course of action. "Get to the little ones back to the abbey, Olba. I'll see what's going on out there. Send some help, just in case." The Molwife had her paws full, trying to keep the Dibbons from following the otter maid. "Here, you imps must come back here with I. Miss Brookie will be very careful now." No sooner had Brookie shut the bolts back and cracked open the wicket gate than she spied the voles, dancing up and down in agitation. "Mr. Lightpaw, it's you! What's going on out there?" Euphis shoved the door fully open and dashed inside, pulling Digity along behind him. He wiped a paw across his brow. "Sure, who did you think it was? A frog on a frolic? Quick, bar at gate! There's teeming with vermin out there!" Before there was time for further discussion, Tam, Skipper and the Long Patrol hares came charging along. Euphis relaxed, quickly regaining his composure now that danger was past. "Well now, Mr. MacBurl, aren't you the grand old sight for me weary eyes? Oh, I didn't think you met me darling wife. Say hello to the good creatures, Digity." Tam grabbed the vole thief's paw roughly. "Where's Doogy Plumm and what's going on here? Speak!" Euphis winced. "I leave off crushing me pot to bits and I'll tell you." Tam relaxed his grip. "Hurry up then, and make it fast." The vermin who'd been chasing the voles were about halfway across the common land when Euphis and Digity were admitted to the abbey, and the door slammed shut. Gulo looked down at Doogie's senseless form. He eyed the great drum, an idea forming in his mind. Signalling the vermin to return, he waited on them, nodding with satisfaction. The wolverine issued orders. "Get the captive and the drum back into the woodlands. Move sharp now, I have a plan."